And this is a really great honor for me to be in front of all of you and to introduce our great speaker tonight. We were all together embarked on an incredibly important mission, and that is to cure type 1 diabetes as soon as we can. And on our path to getting there, we're going to make the lives of people with that disease and the lives of their families better and safer, and most importantly, I think, be a beacon of hope and a helping hand to the families all across the United States and around the world that are affected by this disease. And that's a mouthful. That's a huge mission. And it's the reason why all of you are so important to JDRF. And I will come back up at the end to say a few more words. But the thing that I want you to think about as you listen to our great speaker today is how each and every one of you are JDRF. You are a part of JDRF, and we need your full participation in any way that you can. And sure, I'll talk about money a little bit, but it's about an awful lot more than money. It's about service to all the families around you, especially the new diagnoses, who need other families with type 1 diabetes, and to see role models in kids and young adults and older adults with type 1 diabetes as we search for a cure. And that's really what this organization here locally is all about. So now I'd like to introduce you to someone who has become a friend of mine over the last several years as I've gotten more and more involved with JDRF, and you are going to see someone who, in my opinion, is one of the inspirations, for me anyway, in being involved in JDRF and in doing my small part to help us to find a cure. Aaron Kowalski is the Chief Mission Officer of JDRF internationally and Vice President of Research there. He's lived with type 1 diabetes himself for more than 30 years, and to his credit, has devoted his life's work to helping us find a cure for type 1 diabetes. His accomplishments are very, very long, often very technical, and when they write articles, they're all so long, rows and rows of titles, and I don't like to speak with notes, so I won't try to recite any of them. But among his most notable projects have been his leadership of the Artificial Pancreas Project, which is a great example of how we are going to focus on a less until none approach to curing this disease, because it is critical in the voice of parents and people with type 1 diabetes that we make this disease easier to live with, and we make lives safer so that everybody can realize their full potential, and that we can deliver to our kids healthy bodies when we do finally find a cure. And so I'll turn the podium over to Aaron. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Before I do, actually, one of the things that we're going to do as part of this is have two of our terrific youth ambassadors to JDRF to moderate questions from all of you that Aaron will take after he gives his presentation. So Ceci Powderly and Jake Wexelblatt will join us. They've lived with type 1 diabetes for, in each case, more than a decade. Ceci has, I hate to think about this as an anniversary, but just had her 10th, I almost said the word celebrated, had her 10th year with type 1 diabetes, and Jake has had it for a very long time, since he was 11 months old, and he's now 16. But they are also big inspirations to me as I watch how you guys deal with your lives as role models to other kids with this disease. So I think it'll be a really interesting night for you. I encourage you to, you'll find in the stack that you probably are sitting on or put under your chair, an index card. So as questions come to you during Aaron's presentation, feel free to write them down. We'll collect them, and Jake and Ceci will decide which questions interest them the most, and then they'll ask them. Here.
Whenever I give these introductions, I get very nervous. But it's really great to be back up here in Boston. We do so much in Boston. We have such a great group of folks from a lay perspective, supporting type 1 diabetes in JDRF, from an intellectual perspective at all the amazing universities and companies around here. I'm going to cover at a high level what's going on in type 1 diabetes, why I'm optimistic, what we're doing at JDRF, and then looking forward to the panel discussion with our esteemed panel leaders here. So I always start, some of you have probably seen this picture, but for those of you who haven't, I'm the oldest of 6 kids in my family, and this is our connection. I always start with the connection that we have. My brother Steve, diagnosed in 1977, and one of the themes of my talk today will be progress. And I'll highlight the progress from, back here when Steve was diagnosed to, where we are now and where we're going. Because sometimes it's hard when you're living it day to day to see progress, I think. And there's certainly been a lot of progress, and we're really, I think, at a golden moment in diabetes research moving forward. I always joke, I've used this joke for 12 years, but you can tell my dad's a scientist too. I literally have shown this for 12 years, and it still makes me smile and laugh every time I see it. This is me when I was diagnosed. So my brother's 2 years younger than me. He was diagnosed first. And if looking like this when you're 13 isn't hard enough, add diabetes on top of that. So it's like kicking me while I was down. But it's just my way of saying I'm a scientist at JDRF. People say, what is Chief Mission Officer? I grew up as a scientist at JDRF. Now I work with our Washington team. The mission is curing type 1 diabetes, and until then, developing treatments or therapies or approaches that make life healthier and easier. That's the mission. And JDRF, I think, plays a leadership role in type 1 diabetes, but there's tons of people working on this. And part of my job is how do we all drive the mission as fast as possible. We have so many friends from the Joslin Clinic, for example, or at Harvard, or all over the country and the world, and that's part of what I do. So part of it is I live this, and we've been doing this for almost 40 years in my family, and I think that's important to show. So this is the history of the Kowalski family to some degree, and again, trying to highlight where we were and then where we're heading. So where we were, and I was talking to my good friend Paul Madden is here, and I know Paul, you and I, we've been doing this a long time. Glucose testing. I give talks now, and I have parents who come up to me and say, I can't believe that you did glucose measuring without a CGM. And we didn't even have blood sugar testing when my brother was diagnosed. This is, in fact, an advanced version of his tester. Before we used to drop little, they called them fizzy tabs, into a test tube of urine. So, here's test tape testing if there's glucose spilling into the urine, which is generally happening at a pretty high level. So that's back in the 70s. This is the first Lancer. This is, in fact, when I was diagnosed. This is the device that we used to lance my finger. And many of the old-timers here will remember this. We called it the guillotine. My brother's an industrial designer, and I always say this goes in the annals of bad industrial design. And one of the original Ames glucose meters. This is the vial, well, not the real vial, but the strips that we used when I was diagnosed, and blood sugar testing was coming to the market. So it was colorimetric, kind of like ketone strips are. And again, kind of contrasting to CGM, and folks will say, these CGMs are not accurate. They're not accurate enough. When we were lining up our blood sugars when we were kids, we had a little thing on our fridge, and we would say, 180 or 120? 120? It didn't often match what our A1Cs were. But you see that at 2 minutes, if you're 240 or below, if you're above 240, it was 3 minutes. We used to cut these strips in half to save money. And that was back in the 80s. You go to Medtronic, they have one of these. This is one of the original insulin pumps. And believe it or not, this used to deliver IV insulin and glucose. They have one of these at the Medtronic Museum. So you can imagine that's not a great solution. But many of you know the story of Dean Kamen up in New Hampshire at DECA. Dean, working with a group at Yale who are still involved, created the first insulin pump. And if you don't know the story, Dean was working with his brother who was a pediatric oncologist and wanted to dose chemotherapy in a way that would make kids less sick because it was a big dose and he wanted to do it over a longer period of time. So his brother asked him to create an auto syringe. And the group at Yale saw this and started thinking about the application to diabetes and hence insulin pump therapy. So you look at these insulin pumps, and we used to call them the blue bricks. And any blue brick wearers in here? I'm sure there are people involved. Yeah, Paul knows the blue brick well. But again, you think of the evolution of where we are with pumps today. They're better. They're not perfect. But Bill Tamerlane, one of the doctors, again, who's still involved with diabetes research, and on the front of artificial pancreas research, has pictures of kids playing basketball and running around and at camps with these pumps on. And here's I'm going to talk about artificial pancreas, the original artificial pancreas. It's called the biostator. And one of the things at JDRF is this balance. I always call it the diabetes happiness kind of seesaw. You have the teeter-totter between glucose control and quality of life. And how hard do you push? Do you do 10 tests a day? I could do 20 and I might do better, but that tilts the balance. And here, this worked perfectly. So if you did the balance on the teeter-totter of glucose control, perfect. But I like to run and golf, and I always think, this person looks catatonic. So her blood sugar was great, but she looks like she's in a coma. And it speaks to where we need to go. There's this balance of what do we need to invest to get better glucose control, and where are we trying to drive to have better solutions. So the need, and this is going to be singing to the choir, but I think it's important to frame this. And it's with incredible thanks to the T1D Exchange right here in Boston, one of our top #1 partners. Dana Ball is a great friend and a tremendous champion. And they've really highlighted quite well the challenge we as families face with type 1 diabetes. If you look at how we're doing in the United States, the bulk of people don't make A1C goals. And it's pretty striking. And kids, 4 out of 5 kids are not making A1C goal. So when you struggle and you say, gosh, my child is not making it, you're not alone. This is very, very hard with today's tools. And adults do a little bit better, but it's still 2 out of 3 aren't making it to goal. So we need better tools. This is just framing it. I was talking to some parents who have kids in college. The average A1C for a 17-year-old in the United States right now is 9.3%. So we have a big problem. What I don't show on this, some of the graphs that we show this, is, again, if you look at the ADA targets, this whole line is above ADA target. DKA is one of the most dangerous complications of diabetes. It still kills people, and unfortunately in my position I hear about this almost every week. You see the DKA is still incredibly common, particularly in teenagers and young adults. And this is very, very dangerous. We've got to do better. And then we have some of our advocates here, and I'll make a pitch for advocacy. Everybody in this room should be a diabetes advocate. And on Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago, we were advocating for CGM in the Medicare population. Diabetes, hypoglycemia is our most feared, it's a most feared day-to-day complication of diabetes. And you see that it's still common, and as the research has shown, it builds up over time. People most susceptible to severe hypo are people in the Medicare population, and CGM is not accessible to them. So my brother has severe hypoglycemia problems, a huge barrier to better glucose control, and it's still a common problem. And this is the last little bit of data. It looks technical, but I found this, some of the most important data that I've seen in a long time. And it looks technical, but I'm going to explain it because I think it's amazing. One of the things that you will get sometimes, unfortunately, is people with diabetes just need to try harder, and you could figure it out if you just tried harder. It's a common thing that I face when I'm in the clinical community. Not with everybody, but with some people. And this is one of the issues at CMS right now, is that misbelief. Well, here's data from a study that we funded at Stanford and the University of Colorado, the Barbara Davis Center. And I think it'll resonate with you because I find it amazing. If you look at what this group was doing, is they were using an artificial pancreas system that tried to reduce or eliminate lows overnight. So in this study, the people were wearing pumps, sensors, continuous glucose monitors, testing 6 to 8 times a day. We're at 2 of the most top sites in the entire world. And every night when they went to bed, they hit a button on a computer, but they didn't know if the algorithm would actually run, meaning would it actually be working or not. So it was a blinded study. So it meant that you would have to presume it wasn't, otherwise you would risk getting low. And if you look at these data, just take a look at the control. That means this is when the computer wasn't working. And in 11 to 14-year-olds, 8% of the nights, they had a bout of over 2 hours below 60. And in the little ones, 4 to 10-year-olds, 1 in every 20 nights, these little kids are ending up with sustained overnight hypoglycemia. Now to me, this is like the cream of today's technology. And it's still incredibly hard. These people are trying, I mean, what more can you do at this point? And it's still a frequent, I mean, this is our worst fear, is overnight hypoglycemia. Now, you can look at the system active, it automatically reduces that dramatically, and that gets to where we're going. But again, shows you, kind of my theme is, we need to do better with our treatments right now. So I'm going to talk quickly about where we're funding, because we're going to try to fix this problem, and that's our goal at JDRF. So artificial pancreas, I've been working on this for over a decade now. When we started, we created a roadmap, and the roadmap was saying that ultimately we wanted a machine that acted like the pancreas before you had diabetes, but that was going to be hard. Maybe we should stage it because there are some things that we thought we could do faster, such as pump insulin into somebody who's severely low. If the sensor's telling you you're low and you're incapacitated, your pump is still pumping insulin, and that's an easy fix, for example. So that's actually on the market, a threshold suspend. And it just iterated to be becoming more complex. Where we are today in 2016 is actually all of these approaches work. We've done extensive research, all the way up to multi-hormone, and they work. So what does that mean for people with diabetes? Artificial pancreas systems are no longer a matter of if, it's only when. So this is kind of, I laid out what I think is going to happen and what's public. Artificial pancreas systems will start coming to the United States market in the spring of next year, most likely. And what these systems are, the first-gen systems, will be hybrid closed loops, meaning you wear a pump and a sensor, the pump has software in it, but you still have to bolus. Because if you don't bolus, and people, you don't have to have the bolus, but if you don't bolus, your blood sugar will still go up. If I go and have IHOP or a bowl of Frosted Flakes and a glass of orange juice and don't bolus, the insulin doesn't work fast enough to be fully automated. So most of these systems you'll see are hybrids. Medtronic is done with their FDA trial and has said to Wall Street analysts that they anticipate this reaching the market in the spring of next year. We have a young lady in our office who's wearing it. You can watch the video on our website, JDRF.org. It's amazing to hear her story about living with a hybrid closed loop. She's been wearing it for the last 3 months. Animas, they call theirs an HHM, which is just an acronym for hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia minimizer. They're moving into clinical trials. Bigfoot, I'll talk a little bit about them. They have a hybrid closed loop. Tandem, over right here in the Boston area. Insulet, Roche, all of these companies are working on closed loops. Just this week, you heard news from the Boston group. They have been working on the bionic pancreas, or the dual hormone approach. The dual hormone approach is going to take longer. And Dr. Damiano has said this publicly. He's going after an insulin-alone approach and then a dual hormone approach. I personally think the dual hormone approach is still going to have very significant challenges to come to the market, and I can explain why. It's a much harder problem. But the insulin-alone systems work. And I'm just going to highlight Bigfoot because I've been privy to this story. One of the things that's amazing, so this is a story of a guy, Bigfoot is a friend of mine, his name is Brian Maslish. He was so frustrated with the speed at which this was moving that he built his own artificial pancreas. And his wife and son have been wearing this for 4 years now. So when people say, is this real? They've been doing it 365 days a year for 4 years now. Medtronic pump, Dexcom sensor, and a cell phone. And it's interesting, you can read this article, I always highlight it, and if you don't know the blog, it's called Diabetes Mind. And Sarah, Brian's wife, talks about what it's like to live on this. So they're New Yorkers, but local, both went to Harvard, so smart people, so Boston connection. And the interesting thing about what it's like to be on an artificial pancreas, and I call this defining the value of systems beyond A1C, is Sarah, when she wrote about this, talks about what it's like, and most of the language is beyond glucose control. It's about nighttime security, joy, not waking up with a headache because I got low. I don't fear going to bed when my spouse isn't around. Less burden, better sleep. At the end, she talks about her son, 5.8 A1C with almost no hypoglycemia, and how little we worked for him. So this is an insulin alone system that they built. They're now driving this into a commercial system at Bigfoot. The story behind Bigfoot, why is he named Bigfoot? When he was doing this, he didn't want to make it public because he didn't want people to do stuff that was complicated and a lot of computer science. And a guy who was writing about it, some of you may know, Dan Hurley, writes about diabetes. He heard that this was happening, but he couldn't figure out who was doing it. So I introduced Dan and Brian, and Dan interviewed Brian off the record, and in one of the articles he wrote for Wired Magazine, he said, you know, I heard this was happening and I felt like I was chasing Bigfoot, and I found out Bigfoot was real. And that's where they got the name Bigfoot. So interesting, and I highlight this, but this holds true for all of these systems. And I think it's really interesting. Now, other just interesting things, I mentioned jokingly about the CGM. You know, just having data on your phone, that's been a big boon to people with diabetes. Sensors, when we look at the technology evolving, this is the Abbott Libre. I've been in a meeting in downtown Boston, and we have a number of European investigators in town. CGMs will replace blood sugar monitoring in the very near future. This device is approved in Europe, 14-day wear, 0 finger sticking. So when you think of devices and where we're going, not a cure, but Dexcom is in discussions with FDA for a replacement claim. We're going to see a very rapid move to the elimination of finger sticking, which is great. JDRF has been talking a lot to Google lately. In fact, one of my good friends just joined the company today, a doctor I'm friends with in diabetes. This is their vision of the Dexcom sensor in the next 2 years or so. Miniaturized to the point of being disposable, 14-day wear, cheaper than finger sticking, and the size of a penny. So again, you know, you think of progress and where we were and where we're going. This is not a cure for diabetes, but it's pretty nice. Now the last little technological thing, because this is something, again, that is a little bit, but to me it's a big deal. One of the things that's been a big bugaboo for me, I was on shots for a while, for a long time, and then I went on a pump about 7 years ago. And the thing that made me crazy was these unexpected, just huge highs. Occlusion. And we've been funding a partnership with Becton Dickinson to drive the development of a better infusion set. Simple little piece, but a key component of using a pump. The bottom line is, infusion set technology had not evolved for over 10 years before we got involved with this project. And JDRF and Helmsley funded it together with BD. This will come to the market any month now, hopefully any day now. And it's a simple solution. It has a side port so the insulin can get out if it's butting up on your tissue or for a variety of reasons that occlusions happen. But it's also a lot of other new technologies like a better needle, better plastic, newer adhesives, better hub, much better insulin flow. They went for a 3-day approval, which it will be. They're looking, could you get this out to 7-day infusion, for example. So insulin infusion, just another little thing that we've been working on, but I think it's going to be a big deal. So right before I go to smart insulin, I want to ask, how many people don't have diabetes in the room? Not a lot. How many of those folks are wearing an insulin pump right now? Don't have diabetes? No, nobody? All right, so my point here, I always make this transition, and I've been asking this question in all the talks. In fact, I asked this at a scientific conference recently, and I also asked how many of the people without diabetes draw blood by poking themselves 8 to 10 times a day. Nobody does. And my point is, I talk a lot about the technology because I wear a pump and a sensor. It works. It is a slam dunk. It is going to happen. And it's going to be great. But nobody without diabetes voluntarily wears an insulin pump. In the history of man, you can't go along the Charles River for a run and say, oh, this guy's got an insulin pump on. Nah, I'm just doing it because it's so cool. It doesn't happen. So I talk about this, but we are trying to drive beyond this. And we take a strategy which is near, medium, and longer term, pushing on all fronts heavily. One of the big things that we talk about is, in the medium term, is glucose-responsive insulin and encapsulation are my two areas I'm excited about. This is a Boston-based technology. It's now in Merck. Todd Zion, who came out of MIT, and I was fortunate to work with when we provided some funding to their company, had the idea, could you create an insulin that only worked when glucose levels were high? The big news here is Merck has moved this into human clinical trials. And the product concept that Todd and his team had was a once-a-day injection that you didn't have to do anything else. And they could take their animals that had diabetes and run them on wheels, feed them, not feed them as much, feed them more, and their blood sugars with the glucose-responsive insulin would be normalized. So this would be a transformative insulin. Back when my brother and I started, pig and cow insulin, then recombinant human insulin. Now we have better insulin analogs. This would be the ultimate insulin. The good news here is the fact that Merck is moving on this has caused a groundswell of interest in this field. We just announced a partnership with Sanofi. They're working and have contributed a big amount of money on a competitive product to this. Novo Nordisk and Lilly are working. One of the big questions I often get is there really going to be a cure because companies make too much money off selling products, treatments? Absolutely. It's not like Novo Nordisk is sitting over in Copenhagen saying, you know what, that's awesome that Merck is doing this and we're just can't wait to close up shop. They're trying to figure out how are they going to get there. So there is a rapid push for these companies to try to outdo each other, and this is where competition is good. So this is the work that Todd and the team did now, moved into Merck. Bringing an insulin to market costs between $1.5 billion and $2 billion. So this is where JDRF tries to hand the baton, and I'm very, very excited about smart insulin. If folks have questions, we can talk about it. Encapsulation is the other horse in the medium-term race for me. And the idea here is, could we cure, I'm going to use cure type 1 with air quotes, because everybody in here has the same definition of the holy grail of a cure. We walk away and we're done. Nobody argues that. But here the idea is, what if you had an implant that lasted a year or 2 years, where you didn't have to do anything? But you did have to go back and get it topped up. It's not the holy grail definition, but I think most people in here would think that that would be pretty good. The idea is, could you cure type 1 without fixing autoimmunity? To walk away, we've got to fix autoimmunity, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But what if you didn't? And this is one of the companies that's working on this. Obviously, the legendary and amazing Dr. Melton here in Boston is working on an approach. And there are a number of companies. We have over 25 groups that we're working with, working on encapsulation. The idea is that we always use the example of the shark cage. Instead of going, if you're going in the ocean in shark-infested waters and say you want to take pictures or something down there, instead of trying to kill all the sharks that might eat you up, just go down in a cage. That's the same thing with the immune system. Instead of trying to, as we're trying to figure out, I'm not saying we're going to try to kill all the sharks, but as we're trying to figure out the immune system, these guys, these companies are saying, could we physically protect the cells? So ViaCyte has moved this. This is what the product looks like, their product. A variety of groups, again, are working on this. Sean and I were in San Diego in January, and the CEO of the company talked about their first patients. They have 14 people who have been implanted with this device. In animals, this cures their diabetes. So the question is, will it work in people? That's the big question. What they've done in the first trials is they're testing, will the cells live? Unlike Dr. Melton's cells, where they're shooting for the cells to be going right out of the gate, these cells are what we call precursors. They take a little time to grow up inside the body. So they've been taking the devices, implanting them in people, pulling them out at different times, looking at the cells, seeing how the cells are doing. The good news that Sean and I and others heard, and I know Lisa was there as well, Lisa Wallach, is in these preliminary studies, they are seeing the cells maturing in people. So they have FDA approval to go up to 40 people. They've broadened this study up to an amazing group that we worked with for a number of years in Canada. And again, we have a number of other groups working on this, including the big companies. Again, kind of coming back to try to hammer this point home. J&J is driving on this front. Novo Nordisk, Medtronic is driving in this space. So all of these companies, when they say, what is the future and going to put us out of business, this is one of the things that they're thinking about. And for me, in the next few years, this is going to be a very, very exciting field to follow. Again, the idea is one of these devices under your skin for a 1 to 2 year duration. And that would be pretty amazing. What about the end game, which is, can we walk away and get a holy grail cure? And this is data, I think part of this is from the Joslin Clinic 50-year medalist study. Turns out that people with type 1 diabetes can still make insulin over their lifespans, most people. And I'm a very simple thinker. If you've ever gone to the boardwalk and you play whack-a-mole, does everybody know whack-a-mole? You know, and especially when I had kids, they just go crazy with the whack-a-mole and try to get the tickets out. So the way I think about this is the pancreas is probably, the beta cells are probably like the moles. Like, we want to get going again. And then there's this crazy kid who just can't stop, hitting the moles. And that's our immune system. But it does say, and this has been validated in a number of studies now, that the pancreas, even for people, you can see these people. So what these dots are, is each of these dots is a person. And the higher on the line is the amount of C-peptide they're making, which says that they're making some insulin. Not enough to regulate their blood sugars well, but it's not zero. So, and you can see there are people out to almost 50 years who are making insulin. So the holy grail cure, it says it can be done, to me. And now what it has to go with is hand in hand with immunotherapy. And that's been hard. Big news on immunotherapy right now, and I don't have a slide, but I find it really, really interesting. Down at Yale, out at UCSF, there are groups now working more on, I've always thought of this as immunosuppression. We're trying to suppress the bad part of the immune system. Where the trend right now is and I don't know if there are immunologists in the room because I may speak out of school, but I think it's pretty accurate, is immunoboosting to get people fixed. And the idea here is your immune system, to simplify it, has cells that are killing bad stuff, and then kind of cells that we call regulatory cells that keep things under check. And the regulatory cells in autoimmunity get out of whack. The balance shifts. And these guys will attack stuff that they shouldn't, like your beta cells. Or in other autoimmune disorders, other things that cause problems. And it was really interesting to me recently that Dr. Bluestone at UCSF, who's a world leader here, just got a $10 million gift from Sean Parker. If you don't know Sean Parker, he created Napster, and if you've ever seen the Facebook movie, he was Justin Timberlake played him, a famous internet investor, billionaire. And the word on the street is Sean Parker doesn't have a type 1 connection that we can find. But he has some hypersensitivity allergy problems. And the reason I'm mentioning this is, this field is kind of taking this immunology up a level. Jeff uses type 1 diabetes as what he's trying to fix. But the feeling is that this could be portable across autoimmunity. Now in type 1, what it tells us, if you could do that people are probably ripe to walk away at some point. I can't say when. I think it's going to be a while. It's going to take time. But it does say, with the amount of smart people working on this, it gives me optimism that this is the end game. And JDRF has not lost focus on that. It's a huge focus. It's a huge amount of resources going there. Last little bit, 4 minutes left here. Prevention. So anybody who has type 1 diabetes in their family, I come from a family that has the unfortunate 2 diagnoses. I meet families who have many folks with type 1 in there. Our CEO, I think in their immediate family, they have 6 or 7 type 1s now. We know that there's a strong genetic risk, depending on your ethnicity, between 10 and 100-fold over background. Not just for your kids, but even for the parents and other family members. Almost every talk I give, I have a parent who was diagnosed after their kid. So prevention is a big priority of ours. And in fact, you'll often talk to adults and they prioritize prevention over curing the disease because they worry about their kids more than themselves. I worry about my kids, and I worry about my brother's kids, and my siblings' kids. One of the things that's been hard for companies to capitalize on the research here is the FDA pathway has been hard to try new preventative therapies, because the risk in the general population for getting type 1 is very low. But what we know from a lot of research is you can start to screen and see people who are at higher risk. What we know from TrialNet is that if you have 2 autoantibodies, you essentially have type 1 diabetes. You may not have the clinical manifestations of type 1 diabetes. Today, type 1 is defined as you go into the doctors or the hospital and you have high blood sugar. But what we know from TrialNet now is if the people in TrialNet who have 2 autoantibodies, within 20 years, nearly 100% get type 1. So what we've done in a big collaboration, ADA, ACE, the Doctors Organization, Clinical Endocrinologist, AADE, Pediatric Endocrine, have redefined when do you have type 1. And we're publishing this because it will allow companies to do trials sooner and faster to try to prevent type 1. Because doing a drug trial on somebody who has a 0.3% chance, that's a big high bar. Doing it in that person who has a 99% chance, but still has normal blood sugar levels, is a very different discussion. So this is policy and advocacy built on research that is accelerating potential preventative therapies. The proof is in the pudding here. J&J, J&J's been amazing in terms of all the different things they're doing, has launched a major initiative to try to prevent type 1 diabetes. They would never have done this if it weren't for this work. Millions of dollars invested in partnership with JDRF. So really important stuff. Derek, our CEO, has a son who has 4 autoantibodies but has normal blood sugar levels. We want to stop that progression. Now the last thing before I finish, JDRF Peak, and this is a text-laden, but I'll talk about it. One of the reasons I'm in Boston is JDRF has been working with experts from around the world to develop guidelines on how to exercise with type 1 successfully. Now, I think of the Boston Marathon, and I'll talk about my marathon running very quickly. Everybody here could probably tell a story about the challenges of exercising, having a kid playing soccer or basketball or whatever, getting low overnight, getting low on the ice. We this year will publish for clinicians and for families on the web, hopefully on an app, very straightforward recommendations on how to do better with your exercise and diabetes. I have learned so much. I thought I knew a decent amount. I exercise a lot. So we just had a group from all over the world downtown today, and tomorrow I'll be with some of them, finalizing this. Very, very cool. It's called JDRF Peak. So you'll see some of this. And I know Neil Wallach, has championed the Boston Marathon team here. Now, that's always a struggle. How do we coach? And when you go to the clinic, clinicians often struggle with this, so this is a really cool thing. Ultimate thing for JDRF, when we judge ourselves, the research is the foundation, but how we measure success is people doing better. And I'm going to make one more pitch for our advocacy team, and we had some of the folks, what are the folks who are in Washington here? We had some of the advocates, came and lobbied on Capitol Hill. If we don't have access to CGM, the research is done. The regulatory is done, and we have people in the Medicare population who aren't doing better. So one of the things we've been dinged on recently is our funding and how much research funding we've done. And there's a lot of complexity behind this. But one of the pieces is we have taken some research dollars to focus on these downstream issues. And if you don't have access and people don't do better, JDRF isn't successful. So one of the value propositions of JDRF for me, and what I think for people with type 1, is it's all of this stuff. Soup to nuts, how do we get to the end goal? And that, when we talk at our board, it's how do you do better until there's a cure. And when there's a cure, do you have access? So we have an amazing team. We have an amazing team here in Boston. We have an amazing team in New York. Helmsley is such an important partner. They funded over $50 million in research with us, funded the T1D exchange. So I have to acknowledge that amazing contribution. And I always end with my Diabetes No Limits. So if you follow me, so I know a lot of us, we do social media. I look at Maura, one of the most amazing diabetes champions in the world. To me, is my idol, Maura McCarthy. And I always feel like I know exactly where we are in the world because we're tweeting out. And I always tweet Diabetes No Limits. And the best thing my parents said to me, and some of you probably heard me say this, but it's my motto and the way I've lived, is you'll do anything your friends want to do and more. Maybe harder. You may have to work harder, and I will tell you it's never easy. But I show this picture. This is the year one. I've run 19 marathons. I qualified for Boston once. And this was the year, and you can see, if you look carefully, it's mile 18 in New York, and I'm super happy because my family was standing there. So usually you're not smiling so much at mile 18. But I think it's important, and again, it's a testament to how far we've come. And the marathon's often a metaphor for diabetes research. It's a long slog, but we are making progress, and I'm certain we'll get to the finish line. This is my metaphor for, well, this is my inspirational note, and you can definitely follow. I tweet on @AaronJKowalski, and I know the questions, we're going to do the panel. So thank you so much for all you guys do. It's really, really important. So we're going to collect questions. We have a few questions that the team here I know wrote up. So if folks have questions, we just want to make this work as smoothly as possible. And I'm going to stay afterwards if you feel like you didn't get your question answered. So do you guys want to shoot first? Well, then folks can just start submitting stuff.
So,
Oh, can we just...
in your role, do you see research projects that JDRF isn't yet able to fund?
Yeah, this is one of the... I'm just checking my numbers, sorry. This is one of the down the phone, when people look at you think I'm now I'm tweeting. This is one of the hardest parts of our job, and I know my job as a scientist at JDRF, the board, I just had somebody email me today. So we can't fund everything. There's a ton of amazing research out there, and we don't have the budget to fund everything. Somebody emailed me today, one of the areas I get asked about the most is the psychosocial aspects of diabetes. Diabetes and depression, diabetes and stress, and teenagers and rebellion. And what is JDRF doing? And we funded a little bit in this. Probably if we had a bigger budget, I would love to do more. You know, we see people who really, really struggle, particularly young adults. There's so much amazing research. So what we have to do, we have 20 plus scientists in New York working with our board, which is comprised of families, people with diabetes, and parents and grandparents of people with diabetes, is try to figure out with a budget, what are the best things we can do. And that's what we always have to do, and every year we have to make tough decisions. So that's a pitch. You know, I know Sean will come up and say, we're always looking for more support. We always look for leverage. Other groups, we're trying to partner more. Helmsley has done an amazing bit on psychosocial. Helmsley has funded the T1D exchange. We did our Capitol Hill, the type 1 diabetes program, $150 million in research. The companies funding smart insulin and passing the baton. So we're always trying, when we don't have enough, how can we get somebody else to do it? And Every 6 months or so, we meet with all the funders to say, what are you doing? ADA, people always ask me, do you work with ADA? What do you do? Helmsley, NIH, T1D Exchange, what is everybody doing? So it's hard, but we try to do the best possible job, and we're always evaluating.
Having lived with type 1 diabetes for over 30 years, what JDRF funded research has changed your life the most? Would the answer be different for your brother?
That's a great question. So there's no doubt in my family, the CGM has been transformative, and folks have probably heard, but if you haven't, my brother has terrible hypoglycemia unawareness. He's nearly died in a car where he passed out one summer day. He's probably had conservatively 100 plus hospital visits. And I'm gonna digress for an anecdote here because it's amazing the transformation. So growing up, we shared a bedroom, and I could hear him going low just by the pattern of his breathing changing. And he was going into a seizure, and I'd call my parents and would have to do glucagon. And my parents are so into this. I mean, it's just so hard. So the CGM has been transformative, and my brother's a good example of somebody who says, that improved outcomes. He said, I want to cure as much as anybody, but help me now. And the CGM has helped him, which is probably different, but the digression I'm going to make is, last week I was skiing with him and my son in California. And it's amazing. Like, I used to have such stress being with him when we exercised because he would always get low. And he hasn't had a severe low in almost 3 years now, and I attribute that to the CGM. He goes to Dr. Wolpert here at the Joslin, who's an amazing friend, and I can't say enough about that care. But on that plane ride home, they get the beep, 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 it's a red eye. Is there a doctor on the plane? And I said, oh my God. So I'm gonna have to confess, I cashed in my miles, and I was flying, I was working the next day, so I left my son and my brother in coach. And so he wasn't next to me. And I'm like, oh my God, Steve's having us low. And it wasn't him. I couldn't believe it. And he hasn't had a low in a long time. So that has been such a huge transformation for our family. And I'm so proud. It's one of the most proud things that I've done at JDRF, working. And again, the Joslin, Lori LaFell, and Howard Wolpert were part of that trial. For me, I would say the CGM is probably the biggest advance for me as well. I can't say, my G5, my Dexcom died before my ski trip. It's one of the pluses of having a brother with diabetes. I was about to go to California and I didn't have CGM and I was panicking. And he's like, oh, I've got an extra transmitter. Just, pop his transmitter in. So, yeah, it's been a big boost for our family at CGM, for sure.
What research project are you most excited about and why?
Yeah, I think, I talk a lot about artificial pancreas because I've worn it and it's here, it's going to happen. It's right next door, it's going to be here probably next year. So I'm really excited about that. When you wear the artificial pancreas, one of the most amazing things is every single morning you wake up with a good number. I woke up every morning, 110, 110, 110, 110, flat. It's never, easy to get there, and I was probably, last night I wasn't at 110, I was over 200 all night. So that, but for the nearest term solution, I guess encapsulation is, to me, it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a simple solution, and I think I could handle a once every 2 year implant, so that's pretty cool.
You mentioned the Medtronic system coming to the market next spring. Will that be available for people under 18?
That's a great question. So normally what happens is, in most things, FDA requires people to test things in adults first. This is a great example. Medtronic is doing this, and this is all public information, down to the age of 14 in the first system that will come to the market. Now what that means is that they will be able to market this to pediatric and adult groups, and if the pediatrician decides to prescribe it, he or she can do that. So it will be available in pediatric offices, and I think that's important. The other companies don't have data online for what they're shooting for, but our anticipation is they will also be pursuing pediatric claims on their systems. And that's huge. This is another amazing advocacy story. When diabetes devices used to lag 4 to 5 years, approval Europe and then approval in the United States. The Medtronic system is targeted to be available in the US first. And that was completely due to the advocacy work. The team in Washington is amazing. I've been fortunate to work with them for over a decade now. Lots of time at FDA. So this will be here, we think, first and available for pediatric and adult populations.
What is the cooperative relationship between Jocelyn and JDRF?
Oh gosh, I can't say enough about Jocelyn. And you know, we have so much funding up here in Boston. I don't know, the team probably knows the number, but it's millions and millions of dollars. We fund a tremendous amount of research at the Jocelyn Clinic on devices. Doctors LaFell and Wolpert are generally the lead on the CGM front, on artificial pancreas. Dr. Wolpert's been doing some meal stuff on artificial pancreas with fats and proteins. Obviously, our complications work has been so critical. Diabetic eye disease, diabetic kidney disease, Dr. King, Krolewski, I could go on and on. So, you know, when people say, is JDRF competing with the Jocelyn Clinic or the Diabetes Research Institute or the Barbara Davis Center? Absolutely not. These are critical partners of ours. We play a different role. We provide funding to these organizations in partnership that is based upon our strategic plan. And we're fortunate here in Boston that we have a tremendous amount of research going on. But really the value proposition is beyond the local institutions. It's nice to be able to support your local institution, but to me, JDRF funds research wherever it is in the world, and whatever's the best at the time, we think. So I love working with the Jocelyn. I'm conflicted, full disclosure, my brother goes there, and he talks about this, so I'm not outing him. Can't say enough about the team. I love the people there.
Someone asked if this talk will be posted online, and it will within the next couple of days on JDRF's website.
Oh boy.
So the next question is, if they can teach a dog to smell your low blood sugar, why can't a machine smell it as well?
You know, it can. We funded a project. See, this kind of gets into that, you know, I showed you that big device that was the size of the refrigerator, the biostator. We funded a group, and they can detect very nicely high and low blood sugar with a machine. The problem is packaging that into something that's useful for people with diabetes. You know, I showed you the Google Dexcom partnership prototype sensor that they're working on. Another one that they're working on that they talk a lot about with Novartis is the contact lens. And I've questioned, you know, that I think will be appealing to some people, but may not be as appealing to others. And I think the device that detects the blood sugars is a huge device right now. And trying to envision what it takes is actually hard. So this is one of the things that we have to try to figure out is once you get the research, how do you make it real? And some of these things are hard, and that's a good one. And the dogs have been amazing. Stephanie Shaheen, if you haven't read Ellie and Coach, it's an amazing book. She's been on the kind of the tour about their experience with their diabetes service dog, Coach, and it's a great read. I loved it. Talking about the dog, you know, how it smells and senses her lows and highs.
What is the process for research grants? Do you have proposals that researchers solicit, or do you recognize researchers and solicit them?
That's a great question. It's both. So we are actively, our team is always looking for what's going on out in the world, talking to people all over the world about where the next idea is coming from. We also have a wide open door every day. Anybody in the world can submit proposals to us. So what happens is no single person at JDRF can yay or nay a grant. We have a very transparent and I think fair review process. But people ask about this, and I think it's important. Proposals will come in, and we have the team look at it. Does it fit what we're doing? So if somebody submits a proposal on, alcoholism, we triage that and it doesn't go out. Somebody submits a proposal on artificial pancreas, we then will have our team of scientists internally look at it, and then we get external scientists to look at it. And then our board, who is made up of people with diabetes, review everything. So there's this tiered process, and I think it's very, very important because people will come to me and say, oh, you don't like this and you're not funding it. This is based upon rigorous science with a multi-tiered review that has people with diabetes at the top. So the board is saying, is this going to be relevant in our lives? And then the scientific review process to say, does it make sense? Now we, unlike say NIH, sometimes will take bigger gambles, maybe fun stuff that people say is riskier or crazier, but I think it's a very, very fair process.
What clinical trials currently underway or upcoming this year show the most promise for advancement?
Gosh, I think in my mind, the ViaCyte and the different stem cell encapsulation, this next 18 months I think is going to be huge. As they're pulling these devices out, we're funding this work with Dr. Melton, Dr. Langer. If you don't know Bob Langer's work, he's one of the most famous engineers in the world, and he's been working on encapsulation. My personal feeling is that if we can start to understand what makes these cells happy under the skin, that you're going to see an arms race to figure this problem out quickly. And as these trials are moving into people, I think there are so many smart groups working on this that they're going to figure it out. So that's why I'm really optimistic about it. The other clinical trials, if you don't participate, it's a good opportunity. A lot of these clinical trials are going on right now here in your backyard. A lot of the artificial pancreas work, the bionic pancreas, the Medtronic, a variety of different systems are being tested right here. So you can dive right in and do it. Again, doing these artificial pancreas trials, you hear the participants, they rave about it. I think from an intellectual perspective, I cannot wait to see this encapsulation data because I think the companies are going to start to rev on this, meaning they're going to keep iterating and we're going to see really rapid progression there.
Do you have data that shows that CGM for Medicare will save money?
That's a great question. This is one of the one of the things that I'm proud of right now that I didn't talk about, I've begged everybody to be an advocate. Go on the JDRF website. It's super, super easy, and you can make a huge difference. On our advocacy and policy, we just announced about 3 weeks ago a $5.2 million initiative with Helmsley and the T1D Exchange on health policy and type 1 diabetes. And the question of cost savings is really the nut. Because I was in Hartford last week and we drove past Cigna. And I said to Kelly, if you don't know, Kelly Toronto is one of our great staff people. And I said, God, I remember being in there making the CGM pitch to Cigna. Now, if you think of the cost savings, every major payer in the United States covers CGM. And they are driven by their for-profit companies. So they've done this analysis. But I think even deeper than that, one of the things we're doing is how do you define costs? And now you would say this sounds obvious. You can capture hard costs pretty easily. You end up in the hospital. The average hospital bill, if you went to Boston, I would imagine an ER visit's between $20,000 and $25,000. In New York City, it's $25,000. The United States average is about $17,000. So a severe hypo avoided, you can capture that. But how many parents in here have missed a day of work because of a diabetes-related issue? Lots. And I'm sure, we have people who have good jobs here. That's a cost. One of the things that was really interesting to me, we have an alliance that's working on this, is there's a municipality in New Jersey, I think it's New Jersey, who's been looking at ambulance visits out to the field and how tax dollars pay for emergency services. And it turns out, one of the things they learned was that many ambulance visits, or that to the house, many more than they expected were for severe hypo. But they aren't ending up in the emergency room. And right when I heard that, it clicked. Because what my brother used to do, and it was really clear, and people with type 1 who have this problem learn, is as soon as they come out of the hypo, which is usually before they get in the ambulance, they say, I refuse medical care. It's the first thing they'll say. And you say, well, why is that? The reason is they end up in the hospital and get, usually, no offense to any doctors in the room, bad diabetes care in the emergency room. They usually have to spend 3 to 4 hours there, and then they get a big bill. And when you come out of hypo, they don't want to do that, and they're usually fine. Now, there's a hidden cost that we've never captured, but these people are going out, and they're spending a half an hour to 45 minutes in an ambulance with paramedics treating folks with hypo. So the bottom line is it cost effective? We need to do a better case. And this is going to get into a lot of diabetes going forward. It's really, really important because we are in a big, one of the big things on the blogosphere right now is the cost of insulin. Cost of insulin is outrageous. Well, I can see both sides of the equation, but I know I'm dwelling on this, but I think it's so incredibly important. I've been on a huge Afrezza kick lately. I am an Afrezza zealot. If you don't know Afrezza, this is the Mankind inhaled insulin. It is almost, to me, a miracle drug for me. And the company invested over $1.5 billion to bring this drug to the market. And they are behind the 8 ball to stay afloat right now because they can't sell the drug. Payers aren't paying for it, doctors aren't prescribing it. So this cost, and the reason is they value only A1C. So, this cost stuff is really complicated, and this is where Helmsley, JDRF, and T1D Exchange and others are going to try to get at this, because if Mankind fails, the next company, you want smart insulin, and say, hey, spend $2 billion, and guess what? You have a 25% chance of even selling the drug. That's a big, big problem for our whole vision of walking away from this disease. So health policy is really important, and this cost stuff is more than A1C. Severe hypo definitely costs Medicare, and we need to show Medicare that better. We need to do a better job showing that.
So you kind of got into this recently, but the question is, I read today that the cost of insulin has tripled this year. What can we do to pressure drug companies to lower the price?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a double-edged sword. If the companies aren't incentivized to drive to new insulins, we're not going to see research in this, and that's bad. In some countries, and Paul knows this, they are rolling back to regular NPH and old insulins. So anybody who's on NPH here versus the modern long-acting insulins, I mean, it's a big problem. And often what happens is countries will say, well, it doesn't change A1C. But everybody here knows it's a better insulin. And it changes way more. It's lows, it's variability, it's swings. Now, the cost has gone up. And this is a problem. So what we try to do is take an agnostic perspective. And I don't want to sound like I'm being an elitist here or talking down to anybody, but it is so incredibly complicated. The FDA process is too long. The reimbursement values the wrong things. The competition hasn't been there. You could say, well, that's weird, there are 3 companies, but now we're going to see generic biosimilar insulins coming, and that will help. But we need to break down the barriers to those. So again, I kind of come back to JDRF kind of getting dinged on our research budget going down a bit. But we're funding the most research other than NIH in the world. We are trying to work in this space a bit more because it all ties together to the ultimate mission, which is people doing better. So the cost of insulin is really complicated. We talk to the companies. Of course, if people don't have access, they're not doing better. So that's a key component of this. But solving the problem is not a super snap your fingers solution, especially when it costs $2+ billion to bring one of these drugs to the market.
So these last questions are to us. Do do you use a pump, which one, do you use a CGM, and how do you manage T1D at school and with sports? So I use a pump, I use an Omnipod, and I do use a CGM, and they're both amazing. They've helped with my diabetes so much. The CGM has lowered my A1C a ton. It's been awesome. And in terms of at school and at sports, I mean, it's different for every person, and however you deal with it is your way. But what I do is I just keep it with me at all times and look at my blood sugar all throughout the day, and I have stuff in my locker, stuff in my backpack, so it's just always helpful to be prepared. And the same thing goes with sports, you know, before you play a game or go to practice, just look at your blood sugar. So it's just in terms of the whole thing, it's really helpful to be prepared and looking at what's going on before you do anything.
So I use the MiniMed pump as well as the Dexcom G5 CGM, and what I've found to be the most efficient way to handle low blood sugars, which are much more frequent than high blood sugars during exercise, especially with cross country, which is my fall sport, is temporary rates before, during, and after, which is a setting on the pumps where you can take your basal rate and multiply it by a certain percentage so that you're getting less insulin in because your body needs less while you're exercising, as well as always having candy on me, easy access, typically Swedish fish.
Yes, I just said that at peak today. I run the Swedish fish. Genius.
So whenever I need them, I always have easy access, whether it's in my pocket or in my backpack.
Awesome. Well, how about these guys? Is this awesome? Again, I'll hang around afterwards and close down. I want to really just say thank you. This chapter is so important, the research, the community. So thanks for coming out, and thanks for all you guys do.